Mr. President.
Senator from Virginia.
Mr. President, I want to first of all thank the chairman of the Finance Committee for his efforts in this endeavor. I'm disappointed that there was an unwillingness to at least have a vote on this important issue. Mr. President, I've had a very lucky individual. I've had the opportunity to have a career in business. I've had a career as a governor. In each of those cases, I had to learn business practices and accounting practice. Business accounting practices are different than government accounting practices. State accounting practices are somewhat different as well. But I have to tell you, Mr. President, what takes the cake is what passes for rational accounting and scoring practices in the federal government, and how we maintain these fictions about what are costs, what are expenses, in a way where the vast majority of Americans don't have the slightest idea what we're talking about. SGR, OCO, terms that we throw around in this body that have no relationship to the bottom line, but prevent us from taking action to at least start the process of getting our balance sheet right, a balance sheet that right now is $17 trillion in debt that goes up $4 billion a night. Now, the chairman of the Finance Committee outlined, I think very well, how this process came to be, the sustainable growth rate, where Congress now 17 years ago said they saw at that point the cost of Medicare were rising, the cost of our entitlement programs were rising. They put in place at that point what they thought was a rational solution to slowly slow the rate of growth. The challenge was Congress immediately punted. And as opposed to resolving it at that point, we've maintained this legal fiction and this accounting fiction that no one under any kind of traditional standards of accounting would accept, where we've built in this cost increase, and then each year we come back and so-called patch it. And each year we go through a fire drill where lobbyists across town harangue and harass members of both parties on a universal basis to say, oh my gosh, we can't allow this to happen. Doctors and hospitals that should be off spending time providing health care or finding cheaper and better ways to deliver health care storm the halls of the Capitol to make sure that we don't provide what would now be an unsustainable cut in their reimbursement rates. But it appears to me that we are about to now go for the 17th time, one more year, on a short-term patch, and one more time kick this can down the road. What we are avoiding, if we take this vote this afternoon and simply patch over an effort that was brought over from the House, an effort in the House that I would remind my colleagues never came to a roll call vote, we will once again avoid the opportunity to really start to, in effect, clear our balance sheet, to make the size of our debt and deficit, and for those of us who've been involved in this issue, to go ahead and get rid of some of the budgetary fakery that quite honestly makes so many of our other efforts that may be legitimate seem illegitimate because we can't even clean up our books. Now, the chairman of the Finance Committee went through how this SGR was created in 1997 and how we've gone through annual patches. The remarkable thing right now is that the total cost of these patches actually exceeds, that we've already spent, exceeds the cost of repeal. Repeal of SGR at this point is roughly $135 billion. Based upon previous budget estimates, this is the year to take this action. And what has been the challenge in the past is that while there's been agreement, I know we heard from the senator from Alabama and others will come and bemoan the fact that SGR is a fakery. SGR is budget gimmickry. We have this action that's taken on every year where doctors, hospitals, others storm the Congress and say, please don't do this. And then at the 11th hour, we extend. What has avoided opportunities in the past to get rid of this issue is that there's not been a solution, not been a bipartisan solution. But this year, due to the good work of the chairman and the ranking member of the Finance Committee and their equivalents in the House, there really is agreement on what a replacement to SGR would look like. We would move to a system that would actually fix the problem, but also improve the quality of service covered under Medicare. We would move to a payment system which would reward doctors for focusing on providing high-quality care. Doctors would actually be rewarded for talking to each other to make sure tests and services are not unnecessarily duplicated. Doctors would be rewarded for ensuring patients have access to care when they need it, like same-day appointments. Doctors would be rewarded for spending more time with patients and genuinely talking about the patient's priorities and concerns rather than running off to their next appointment. Now, these are all goals, regardless of what some of our colleagues may feel about the Affordable Care Act, these are all goals that I think almost all of us would agree would actually improve the quality of health care in America, and for Medicare, start to help drive that cost curve back in the right direction. And if we would act on this bipartisan solution, we could make a real demonstration, even in an election year, that Congress is actually working together to solve a problem. Now, as the chairman of the Finance Committee noted, in the 5 years I've had the honor of representing Virginia, there's no issue that I've been more passionate about, involved with, than trying to find that common ground around our debt and deficit. Sometimes to the chagrin of my own colleagues on this side of the aisle. I believe getting our fiscal house in order is absolutely the top priority that this Congress faces and our nation faces. I believe failure to do that will squeeze out any investment in education, infrastructure, military, whatever our other priorities are. And part of that is getting our entitlement costs under control. But if we're going to get our entitlement costs under control, we've got to eliminate the budget gimmicks and fakery that now are part of the process. And the primary one on the entitlement side is the SGR. We have a remarkable opportunity to get rid of this piece of budget fakery, to clear the books, to put in place a better system. Now, I know there's been questions about the cost, and I know the chairman of the Finance Committee will soon put up, I believe, a chart which will quote a periodical that doesn't often say good things about those of us on this side of the aisle, and that's the Wall Street Journal, which is called "The SGR Bookkeeping Gimmick Merely Hides Medicare's True Costs by Moving off Future Spending off the Balance Sheet." Again, we have a chance to get rid of that today. And what I think the chairman of the Finance Committee has offered is we could actually get a twofer here. We could get rid of replacing and repealing and replacing the SGR, and at the same time eliminate another budget gimmickry tool, the OCO accounts. So I just can't understand why we wouldn't take advantage of this opportunity to start down the path of cleaning up our balance sheet. End of the day, with the actions we take today, won't get rid of that $17 trillion in debt. It won't bring down our deficit in itself, but it will allow future actions to be dealing with an accounting system and a budget that is much truer to reality. So, Mr. President, the chairman of the Finance Committee has called this the Medicare migraine. I think it's time for this Congress, this Senate, to actually take 2 aspirin, pass his replace and repeal, get rid of this migraine, and at the same time show the American people that we can act in a bipartisan fashion, even in an election year.
Mr. President,
Senator from Oregon.
before he yields the floor through the chair, could I pose a question to the distinguished senator from Virginia?
Senator, proceed.
The senator from Virginia, as usual, has gotten right to the heart of the long-term challenge with respect to entitlements. And I've always tried to describe it as the challenge of protecting the Medicare guarantee. Because what seniors have is a guarantee. It's not something that's kind of up for grabs. It is a guarantee. It is inviolate. And protecting their guarantee means that in the days ahead, we're going to have to figure out new ways to hold down costs. What I've heard the senator from Virginia talk about very eloquently is one of the key ways to do that is what the senator from Virginia and I have sought to do, which is to start having Medicare pay for value rather than just stay with this volume-driven fee-for-service system, which largely rewards inefficiency. I think it's my sense that the senator from Virginia believes that it is very hard to start the kind of real entitlement reform we need, where you protect the Medicare guarantee and hold down costs, unless you make the kind of approach that we're advocating in this repeal and replace strategy with SGR. And boy, we better get to it, because until we have those changes, we can't begin to get on with another area the senator from Virginia feels very strongly about, and that's chronic disease. Diabetes and cancer and heart disease and strokes, which consume more than 80% of the Medicare budget. We can't get on with that or any of the structural entitlement challenge until we do what the senator from Virginia is talking about. By my calculation, is that pretty much the way the senator from Virginia sees it?
Mr. President,
Senator from Virginia.
I would agree with the comments made by the chairman of the Finance Committee. In the repeal and replace proposal, we've laid out ideas that I think, again, across the aisle, there's going to be common agreement in. I know we've been joined by my good friend, the senator from Oklahoma, and no one knows more about health care and has been a stronger voice on entitlement reform than the senator from Oklahoma. And we've spent an awful lot of time wrestling with how we get to that common cause. These common sense reforms that move us closer to quality rather than quantity are a first step. But also a first step is trying to relieve the annual or sometime every 6-month fire drill we go through, where healthcare providers across the country have to rush to Congress to try to get a patch in place, which at the end of the day, they know we will put the patch in place. And the way we put the patch in place more often than not is simply passing on more costs to the providers in an out year. This is the kind of budget gimmickry that, quite honestly, we tried to address in the so-called Gang of Six that would have put more constraints. We didn't get it done. We've got another opportunity today not to solve the whole problem, but by getting rid of SGR, by getting rid of OCO, removing 2 of the accounting and gimmickry obstacles that would help clear the decks towards the ultimate debate we're going to have around tax reform and about entitlement reform. But the value here as well is that we would also, by repealing SGR, put in place reforms that would move us towards a better quality healthcare system for our seniors. So, Mr. President, I know that consensus here and kind of conventional wisdom is at moments like these, we'll always punt. We're going to have a chance to see this afternoon whether we punt one more time or whether we actually, and if it takes a few more days, could wrestle this to the ground and come up with a common cause where we could repeal SGR, replace it with a better system, and perhaps at the end of the day, get rid of not one, but 2 gimmicks that have made our budgeting so much more difficult. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.